Everyone knows the story of Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492. He discovered America, and the world was changed forever. But what if that story isn't entirely true? What if, nearly 500 years before Columbus, another group of people, with a thirst for adventure and an intimate knowledge of the sea, had already set foot on North American soil? This isn't just a theory, it's a proven fact. This is the story of how the Vikings, driven by a series of accidents, fierce courage, and the whispers of a new world, became the first Europeans to reach America. Our story begins, not in Norway, but on the frozen, wind-swept shores of Iceland. By the late 9th century, Vikings had already settled this remote island. They were tough, resourceful, and always looking for new lands. But even for them, sailing west into the unknown was a monumental risk. The man who started it all wasn't a great explorer, but a banished criminal named Erik the Red. Erik was a hot-tempered man, a chieftain from Norway who had been exiled from his homeland, and then, after another killing, from Iceland. He had nowhere to go but west. He heard rumors of land beyond the horizon, and he set out to find it. The sagas tell us he sailed for 3 years, exploring the new land, and when he returned to Iceland to recruit settlers, he didn't just tell them about the harsh, ice-covered place he'd found. He, with a brilliant stroke of marketing, named it Greenland. The name was a lie, a magnificent falsehood to attract more settlers to this harsh new land, and it worked. In 986 AD, Erik the Red led a fleet of 25 ships from Iceland, and though only 14 of them made it, they established 2 thriving settlements on the southwestern coast of Greenland. This was the launch pad for a journey that would go even further. Leif Erikson and the Accidental Discoverer. The stage was set for Erik the Red's son, Leif Erikson, to complete the journey to America. Leif was a natural adventurer, and the sagas, the epic historical tales of the Vikings, passed down orally for centuries before being written, say he heard a new rumor. It was a story of a man named Bjarni Hrafnsson. Bjarni's story is a fascinating prologue to Leif's. In the year 986 AD, Bjarni was sailing from Iceland to visit his father in Greenland. But a terrible storm blew his ship far off course for days, even weeks. When the weather finally cleared, he and his crew saw land to the west. It wasn't the jagged, ice-covered mountains of Greenland. It was a coastline covered in forests and rolling hills. Bjarni, however, was not on a mission of discovery. His only goal was to find his father. He refused his crew's pleas to land and explore, and he simply turned his ship around and sailed east until he reached Greenland. Bjarni's story was incredible, but it remained just that, a story. Leif Erikson, however, was not one to let a good story go to waste. He was a man of ambition, and the legend of this new land burned in his imagination. Around the year 1000, he bought Bjarni's ship, gathered a crew of 35 men, and set out to retrace Bjarni's route in reverse. The sagas tell us he found this new land in 3 stages, each with a distinct description that modern historians have been able to match to real places. First, they landed on a barren, flat, and rocky place. The coastline was covered in large, flat stones, so they named it Helluland, which means land of flat stones. Today, historians believe this was likely Baffin Island in modern-day Canada. The land was so uninviting that they didn't stay long. Next, they sailed south and found a land that was flat and forested. The Vikings, who were always in need of timber for their ships and homes, were overjoyed. They named it Markland, Forest Land. This is believed to be the coast of Labrador, a place still known for its dense forests today. Finally, they sailed even further south. The climate grew milder, the land more inviting. They landed in a place with green pastures, an abundance of grapes growing wild, and a mild climate that was a world away from icy Greenland. Leif called it Vinland, Wineland. This was their destination, a place where they could settle and thrive. It was here that they built a settlement, the very first European settlement in North America. Meadows, the archaeology of a saga. Leif and his crew spent the winter in Vinland, building a settlement. The sagas describe their new home in great detail, mentioning the fertile soil, the timber, and the abundant salmon in the rivers. They even mention their first encounters with the native people, whom they called Skraelings. These interactions were tense and violent from the start. The Vikings, with their superior iron weapons, were often in conflict with the indigenous people, who used stone tools and had a far greater understanding of the land. For centuries, this was where the story ended. It was a fascinating tale, but without any physical proof, it remained a myth. Then, in the 1960s, a remarkable discovery changed everything. A Norwegian couple, the husband and wife team of explorer Helge Ingstad and archaeologist Anne Steen Ingstad, followed the clues in the sagas. They were looking for a place that matched the descriptions of Vinland, and after years of searching, they found a promising site on the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada. What they found at a place called Meadows was truly astonishing. They began to excavate a series of overgrown, grassy mounds that local residents had long believed were an ancient indigenous settlement. Instead, they unearthed the remains of a Viking settlement, longhouses, a blacksmith's workshop, and a forge. This wasn't a temporary camp, it was a small but fully functional settlement. The artifacts they found were the definitive proof. They discovered a bronze pin used to fasten a cloak, unmistakably Viking in origin. They found a stone lamp, and most tellingly, they found a small spindle whorl, a tool used for weaving wool. This last find was particularly important because it confirmed that women had been part of the settlement, an essential element for a colony to be viable. Later, scientific breakthroughs added even more weight to the evidence. Scientists used radiocarbon dating combined with a unique astronomical event. A massive solar storm in the year 992 AD left a distinct carbon-14 spike in tree rings all over the world. By analyzing Viking artifacts, specifically wood and charcoal found at the site, researchers could pinpoint the exact year the wood was cut. The results were incredible. The wood was felled in the year 1021 AD, placing the Viking presence at Meadows precisely 471 years before Columbus. The fall of Vinland, why the Vikings didn't stay. So, if the Vikings reached America and even built a settlement, why didn't they stay? This is the central, lingering question of the saga, and the answer lies in a confluence of factors that spell the end for their American dream. The first and most significant reason was the conflict with the native peoples. The sagas give us a gripping account of this. After Leif Erikson returned to Greenland, a new expedition led by his brother Thorvald set out. Thorvald was killed in a skirmish with the Skraelings, becoming the first European to die on American soil. But the most ambitious attempt at colonization came from a wealthy Icelandic merchant named Thorfinn Karlsefni. Around 1010 AD, Karlsefni led a much larger expedition with 3 ships and a group of around 160 people, including women and livestock. This was a serious attempt at a permanent colony. Their initial encounters with the Skraelings were peaceful, with the 2 groups trading. The natives were particularly interested in the Vikings' iron tools and milk, which they had never seen before. But this uneasy truce shattered during a violent altercation. The sagas tell a story of an escaped bull from the Viking settlement, terrifying the natives and sparking a raid. In the ensuing battles, the Vikings, despite their superior weapons, were hopelessly outnumbered. The Skraelings used hit-and-run tactics and fought fiercely, and the Norse quickly realized that they couldn't defend their small settlement against a much larger, more mobile, and more numerous enemy. This is where another legendary figure enters the story, Freydis Eiríksdóttir, Leif Erikson's sister. The sagas portray her as a fierce, ruthless woman. During a battle, when the Viking men were in retreat, Freydis, who was pregnant, famously exposed her chest and let out a terrifying war cry. The act so shocked both the Vikings and the natives that it gave the Norsemen a chance to regroup. But even her bravery couldn't change the ultimate outcome. The constant threat of attack was simply too great. The second reason for the failure was logistics. The journey was incredibly long and dangerous. A trip across the treacherous North Atlantic in an open longship was a heroic feat, and a permanent supply line was impossible to maintain. Greenland itself was a difficult place to live, and its population was too small to support a permanent, distant colony. The Vikings at Meadows were at the very end of their supply lines, and without a constant flow of new people and resources, their small outpost was doomed. Finally, the political and economic climate back home was changing. The Viking Age, as we know it, was coming to an end. The powerful Norse kings were converting to Christianity, and their focus shifted from raiding and individual exploration to building stable, powerful kingdoms in Europe. The age of bold, individual adventurers was giving way to a more centralized, structured world. The idea of a small, isolated colony on the edge of the world became less and less appealing. The Vikings' discovery of America was a moment of incredible human achievement, but it was a quiet one. The knowledge of Vinland remained confined to the sagas and the small, isolated communities in Greenland. The discovery had no lasting impact on the world because it was a technological dead end. They lacked the sailing technology and the political will to connect the new land with the old in a permanent, meaningful way. Columbus's journey, nearly 5 centuries later, was different. It was not the journey of a few adventurous individuals. It was backed by the full power of the Spanish monarchy. His ships were larger, and his voyages were a deliberate, state-sponsored mission to establish trade routes and colonies. His voyages opened a permanent sea lane between Europe and the Americas, and that's why we remember him as the one who truly changed the course of history. The story of the Vikings in America is a powerful reminder that first isn't always what matters most. It's about the lasting connections and the ripple effects that follow. They were a people ahead of their time, but their incredible journey remained a secret for centuries, waiting to be rediscovered by the modern world. Their legacy lives on in the sagas and in the windswept landscape of Meadows, a place where legend and history meet, and where the echoes of Viking voices can still be heard.
If history leaves you curious and craving more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Join us on the journey through time, one forgotten echo at a time.